All right. Hello. Welcome everybody to August Tenant Talk Live. As always, my name is Sid Betancourt and I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a project manager here at the Coalition for Inclusive Community Engagement. And in case you might not know where you are right now, this is Tenant Talk Live. And it's a monthly meeting that we have where we provide opportunities for you all to connect with one another as residents, as tenants, and also to connect with NLIHC. We'll share some best practices. Sometimes we'll learn more about influencing federal housing policies, which will probably be a big part of the discussion today, and also how to lead in your communities. And for folks who might have not gotten the alert yet, this meeting is being recorded and it's going to be uploaded to YouTube afterwards. We have a really awesome guest today who is also my coworker, Kayla, joining us. But before I pass it over to Kayla, I'll do just some brief announcements that I always do. And as per usual, we're gonna do our community agreements for Tenant Talk. So let me just make sure that that's there. So the first one being platinum rule, just making sure to treat others the way they want to be treated and just be considerate that that might not necessarily look like how you want to be treated. Important in this case, just making sure to mute your mic except when you're speaking. Listening with an open mind and empathy, picking up space and giving space to others. And then again, just a reminder that Talk Live is being recorded and will be shared online afterwards. And if y'all have any feedback or if you want to add anything to this, feel free to email me afterwards. All right. And then for folks who might be a little bit newer to NLIHC or newer to the space, we do have a weekly email called The Connection, where you will receive like a lot of recap materials, including the recording and the notes for this specific meeting. And that'll go out this Friday. And you can sign up for those emails in a link that we'll have in the chat shortly. And then we also have the last month's recap materials in the chat for you in just a second, but in case you weren't able to join last month, we'll be able to share that with you as well. And then again, if you have any questions or anything that come up throughout the call, feel free to use the chat to drop your questions and I'll keep track of them and we'll get to them at the end. We're hoping to also have some time to ask you some questions for feedback at the end as well. And yeah, really big, just because we want to make sure that we're able to hear whoever's speaking, just make sure that you stay muted if you're not speaking. But yeah, I'll introduce NLIHC's very own Kayla Laywell now, who will provide an overview of the National Tenant Bill of Rights, which just came out. For folks that haven't met Kayla before, she is a housing policy analyst at NLIHC, and she works on a lot of issues. She works on fair housing, tenant protections, rural and native housing. And before she worked at the Coalition, she was in Senator Ben Ray Lujan's office, and also worked at a district office for former Congresswoman Xochitl Torres Small in New Mexico. And she also started her career as a manager in a rapid rehousing program. And I know we have some folks who do direct service as well on this call sometimes. So she can definitely relate with y'all there. And yeah, I'll let you take it away, Kayla.
Thanks so much, Sid. And hi, everyone. So good to be here. I do have a PowerPoint. Do you mind if I screen share?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. All right, so you all should be able to see a PowerPoint. Any thumbs up? Any thumbs down? See Renee? All right, I saw Chandra give me a thumbs up. Okay, all right. So last month I gave y'all a brief overview and an early request for endorsements, and this month I have a more in-depth explanation as well as a further discussion prompt and some questions just to see more about how this plan could roll out. There we go. So as I told y'all last month, the National Tenants Bill of Rights is a groundbreaking step in shifting the power to renters in advancing tenant protections. And it is not yet policy. It's not yet a piece of legislation that has been introduced in Congress or nationally, but it is a policy platform that we, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, the National Housing Law Project, and the Tenant Union Federation are launching to build momentum behind a solid platform for a baseline of tenant protections nationwide. So what this means is that, it's a legislative framework, and it was written with direct input from tenant leaders, people with lived experience of housing instability, housing law experts, and advocates nationwide. Our nation's 114 million tenants deserve a safe, stable, and healthy home, and the National Tenants Bill of Rights would provide a bold legislative platform to enshrine tenants' rights throughout the tenancy in both private rental housing and for those living in federally assisted properties. People talk about the solution to the nation's housing crisis as focused solely on housing supply, but we really do believe that that's only one part of a comprehensive set of solutions needed to fix the broken market, and robust tenant protections are needed to, protect everyone living in rental housing. We also, call for the need for increased rental assistance, strengthen prevention tools, and in regards to tenant protections, the National Tenants Bill of Rights is a model for doing just that. And we believe that when enacted, the National Tenants Bill of Rights will help prevent housing instability and homelessness, redress longstanding racial and social inequities, and advance housing justice. So again, I'm joining the call today to ask everyone to endorse the National Tenants Bill of Rights, and I have a couple discussion prompts at the end. So to get more into the details today, these are the 7 rights listed in the National Tenants Bill of Rights. They would establish a baseline of tenant protections for everyone living in the rental housing market. And these apply to a tenant's experience from applying for rental housing, signing a lease, during the duration of living in your home, and eventually ending your tenancy. The following 7 rights that I'm going to describe more in depth are an overview, and they don't encompass the full platform. To read the complete National Tenants Bill of Rights, I put a link in the chat that includes the 53-page policy platform. We're also working on a few more materials to make it more digestible, and that's going to be more to come. So, getting into the first one, the right to a fair application. Everyone should get a fair shot in the application process. Landlords should only consider information relevant to an applicant's obligations as a tenant. And in order to make the rental application process fair for everyone, we need to regulate how landlords can screen tenants. So we're calling for applicants to not be denied housing because of information that is irrelevant to the question of whether they can carry out the responsibilities of being a tenant. For example, a voucher holder, someone with a housing choice voucher, should not have to show that their income is 3 times the amount of rent when HUD is paying a portion of their rent. And they should not be denied simply on the basis of their credit score. We also need to make the application process more transparent and less of a black box, and remove unnecessary barriers like application fees. This section includes regulations to the tenant screening companies, whose practices often harm tenants without any corresponding benefit to the tenant, such as fees, relying on inaccurate or biased information, and just making the whole application process less transparent. The second right in the National Tenants Bill of Rights is the right to a fair lease. Leases shape the landlord-tenant relationship and should clearly define the duties and rights of both parties to avoid predatory and deceptive terms. So first of all, the lease should be clear. It should be in plain language and include the landlord's contact information. There should also be disclosures that are mandatory, such as what does a tenant owe in rent versus non-rent fees, which in some states should not factor into evictions at all. and should also clarify how habitability issues are handled in terms of the quality and habitable standards of the home. Second, the lease should be free from unreasonable terms. For example, some states give tenants important rights, like the right to a jury trial in an eviction proceeding, but some landlords go around these rights by making tenants waive them in the lease without a tenant understanding what they're giving up. This is an unreasonable practice and should not be allowed. Tenants also should not be subject to abusive terms, like terms that reset the rights to the tenant's disadvantage. One example is requiring tenants to pay attorney fees for the landlords, but not the other way around. The third right in the National Tenants Bill of Rights is the right to freedom from discrimination and harassment. No one should face discrimination, violence, violations of privacy, or harassment in their homes by their landlords, and tenants need to have the tools to prevent and stop such abuses. To fight against discrimination, we need more funding and more resources for government agencies like HUD to enforce fair housing laws. We've heard again and again that tenant protections do nothing if they're not enforced and they're not implemented well. And so we call for robust enforcement, and I can talk more about that later. But tenants also need to be able to defend themselves in eviction courts by asserting fair housing violations by their landlords. We also need to protect tenants from harassment by their landlords, namely by giving them a private right of action, the ability to assert an affirmative defense in an eviction, and the right to attorney fees when they are harassed. We also need clear standards on when a landlord can access a unit and certain expectations for when they do so. The fourth right in the National Tenants Bill of Rights is the right to a habitable home. When tenants face a health or safety standard or need a repair in their home, they should have a clear way to communicate with their landlord, who should then make a prompt fix. Tenants should have practical means of enforcing their right to a habitable home, including a minimum standard across jurisdictions, and the information that they need, such as maintenance history and neighborhood level risks, to be clear and transparent. They should also have the right to enforce their rights through the right to repair and deduct, and sanctions for owners who fail to comply. That's at the tenant level. We also need to increase the transparency about landlords and properties so that we are calling for, so to do that, we are calling for state and local rental registries and a national database of federally subsidized housing, which would include eviction rates, health standards and complaints, and property or owner subject to HUD enforcement action. So there's clarity on both sides of that. Okay, fifth, we're almost done, I promise. The right to reasonable rent and costs. This section is focused on how we regulate rent to prevent unreasonable rent increases. We also need to regulate non-rent fees, as well as, additional charges that put tenants in a precarious position financially and with potential eviction risks. This section includes fees, non-rent fees, including security deposit, late fees, utilities, and rental insurance. Sixth, and really building on the power of the National Alliance of HUD Tenants and other tenant organizers who have done a lot of work building up to this platform. The right to organize. So this is the sixth right in the National Tenant Bill of Rights. And it calls for strengthening the right to organize in all federal housing programs, including housing choice vouchers, properties financed by the low-income housing tax credit, as well as establishing a federal right to organize in the private rental market so that all tenants have the right to organize. This also clarifies which activities are protected in the right to organize, including protection from retaliation for engaging in those activities, remedies for when landlords do engage in retaliation, And it also calls for funding for organizing and oversight of buildings by tenant associations. This section also calls for establishment of tenant opportunity to purchase, or TOPA policies that are pretty staggered across the country. Seventh and finally is the right to safeguards against evictions. Due process is a basic right that we all have, and tenants should have protections from illegal evictions and evictions without good cause. This section includes the right to security of tenure, including just cause standards, the notice and right to cure lease violations, and early termination in specific situations, such as domestic violence or bifurcation of the lease in cases of roommates. This section also calls for due process rights in eviction court, so pre-filing, eviction diversion, and right to counsel, including meaningful hearings on the merits of the case. And finally, it includes the right to be free from unlawful self-help evictions. So that is a summary of the National Tenants Bill of Rights. My first ask is for everyone to endorse the National Tenants Bill of Rights. For the first time in NLIHC history, we're asking for individual tenants and individual people to endorse one of our policy priorities. And this is really to build up the momentum and show the need for, you know, the mass amount of people that support basic tenant protections, right? And this is a baseline. There's more needed. And just on that note, if there are specific components that you want to make sure are in the National Tenants Bill of Rights, please do feel free to email me. We are, you know, not introducing this as, well, of course, we are not members of Congress, but we are not urging members of Congress to introduce this until January 2025. And so we're using the fall and winter to really just build as much momentum as we can and to see how much we can get people to endorse this. So individuals, organizations are also invited to endorse the National Tenants Bill of Rights, elected officials, and candidates running for elected office. So Sid, is now the time for me to dive into my questions for the group?
Really quickly before we do that, is it okay if I kind of go through just a few questions?
Yeah.
And then I know there was a lot of questions in the chat too. If we don't get to yours, I'm not ignoring it, I promise. But it might not be as relevant to Kayla right now, so I'll drop like our email in the chat that you can email with those questions and we can follow up later. But Karen Rhodes asked like if this would apply to LIHTC properties too, and I know we've seen that come up a lot in some places. And she also asked a good question about like, wasn't the Fair Housing Act designed to do exactly what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, great questions. So the first one, yes, this would cover federally assisted properties, which include those financed by the low-income housing tax credit, or LIHTC properties. And the second question about the Fair Housing Act, yeah, theoretically, the Fair Housing Act, which was passed in 1968, should have done this. However, we have seen a lot of back and forth from the executive branch. Namely, President Obama took a few good steps, President Trump overturned those actions, and President Biden has taken slowly but surely more steps to enact the Fair Housing Act, but it hasn't been as strong as it could be. So this platform is really calling for both the legislative branch in Congress and the executive branch in the president and HUD's administration to enact fair housing as strongly as we need it to, and calls for more funding to do so too.
Awesome, thank you. And then we might not be able to answer this one because I feel like it's probably more like a legal question, but can landlords deny like a rental due to a low credit score when you're on Section 8. I feel like that might not be a question for us, but we can try to figure out the answer later if we can't figure it out now.
Yeah, I'd recommend reaching out to legal aid. I think we have a few folks from the National Housing Law Project, but I mean, that's the reality, right? Like landlords are discriminating upon, upon all kinds of factors, even if they're not allowed to, it's happening all the time. So that's why we need a lot more funding for enforcement too.
Yeah, okay, so I think like the other questions, feel free to reach out to us after this call, everyone. And we can try to answer what we can. But yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Kayla, to talk about some of the discussion questions you had. And I just noticed one more question come in real quick, if you can answer that one. Is the National Tenant Bill of Rights in place like in any state or country? If you can just like kind of clarify a little bit about like where it is right now and where we're hoping to get it into the future.
Yeah, that's a good question. So our NLIHC's state and local innovations team has been slowly tracking tenant protections across the country in states and localities. But unfortunately, it's a real piecemeal approach, right? Some jurisdictions, some cities and counties have really strong tenant protections, and some are really bare bones and cited on the side of property owners and landlords. And tenants are just kind of out of luck. And it really shouldn't be that way. We need a baseline of federal standards across the country so that every renter is protected, just like many homeowners are, right? So no, there's not a national standard at this moment.
Thank you, Kayla. And then really quickly, before we get into the feedback, just a reminder for folks to stay muted if you're not currently speaking. Yeah, thank you, Kayla.
Yeah, so I appreciate those questions, and please do stop me, anyone else too, if we have other good questions. So a few other questions I wanted to get some feedback from y'all. We have, NLIHC has consulted a lot with our tenant leader collective, or the collective, and gotten some really great feedback on how to build the momentum, how to really, make this useful and also tenant-led. We understand that any policy like this, any policy platform framework like this will only be successful if it's led by and supported by tenant organizers, tenant union leaders like you all, who are driving the momentum in your communities. So in that regard, I wanted to just hear, in similar policy pushes, if you have fought for a right to counsel in your community, or similar tenant priorities, what outreach activities have been the most successful for you? What has been, the best kind of tool for building the momentum in your communities? I can stop screen sharing.
Cynthia has her hand up.
Hi, everyone. I think we are still working on building momentum, but major wins like rent stabilization definitely got folks excited. But, we also deal with a lot of state preemption in Florida. So I think it's trying to figure out ways around that. So things like the National Tenant Bill of Rights, we're super excited about.
Thanks, Cynthia. It's good to hear your voice.
Hey, Sid.
Yeah. I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say something follow up to that, but yeah, I've heard of a few places doing. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. Preemption has been like an issue that people have asked us about too. And if anybody else has like experience with that too, I think we'd be interested in hearing about that. But I don't know, Kayla, if there was anything else that you wanted to follow up with that comment.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. And we're taking notes too, so I can hopefully keep thinking on this, but just a note on preemption, you know, it's, of course, state preemptions are very difficult to work around. Localities cannot pass legislation when there are state preemptions. But the way that we are thinking about this is to push administratively. So for example, you know, advocates can work through the budget to fund legal assistance or mediation. And, you know, I don't want to talk about that's what you are doing in Florida, but that's what we are hearing a lot about in Florida too. And another catch is that when a locality passes a tenant protection policy, you know, the state may try to preempt it after the fact. So localities should be building relationships and developing the messaging at, you know, with the state at the same time in order to ward off preemptions after the fact, right? That's a lot, of course, to ask of advocates on the ground, but that's just some of the thinking and strategy we're thinking about this.
Thanks, Kayla. And I see Mark has his hand up, and then after Mark, we'll go to Sandra.
Yeah, hi, Mark Farrer from Colorado. Here locally in Boulder, we passed or tried to pass our rent control initiative 40 years ago, and we had really good support for it, but unfortunately, then the state came in and banned all rent control everywhere in Colorado. And sadly, I think that began a trend of many states to do similar kinds of things. And we've been battling ever since, trying to overturn that ban, but it's been a real uphill battle. But what I was going to say is we are successful in having passed other tenant initiatives at the local level, at the city level, through petitioning. And voters do support those things, especially when they're reasonable. Like we got interest on security deposits, protections from evictions in terms of funding attorneys to help out with those. So those local initiatives really can be successful, strategically speaking.
Thanks, Mark. And then I'll pass it to Chandra. Sorry, I'm like trying to keep up with the chat too, and I know Kayla's taking notes, so we're listening. We're taking it all in, I promise. Hi. Oh, you muted yourself. There you go.
I had a moment of muting.
It's okay.
I was kind of curious about, you know, it says like no retaliation and things like that in there, and I had read through it before, but one of my biggest things is that when you do have a voucher program, and I know you mentioned like some things about that, but when you're working with housing assistance and whatnot, you know, like there seems to be, like, I have a bad rental history now because they didn't pay the rent on time. You know, we didn't get renewed because they didn't pay the rent on time and they didn't do their job. So I'm wondering if there's anything in there that's going to like highlight that. Like it's going to be harder to get a new apartment after. I'm wondering if there's anything that addresses that kind of issue. It's just been kind of a problem.
Thanks, Chandra. So it sounds like you're asking for when the property owner doesn't make their payments on time
No. So when you have a housing voucher program and they're paying the rent every month, but they're not paying the rent on time, so the property manager refuses to renew, they harass, you know, and they won't give you a good rental history moving forward because they didn't pay the rent on time because the housing program didn't.
Yeah.
Or they didn't pay the rent at all. There were sometimes they didn't pay it at all.
Right. And so the Public Housing Authority is causing you to have a negative rental history.
Yeah, it was actually like it was a housing voucher program that was through HUD, and it was an outside of the state or county. I mean, it was part of it, but yeah, not like directly like DCHA or anything. So
I can't speak directly to that at this moment, but I am going to double check and make sure that that's in there. That's a great point. Thank you.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Raina.
Okay, I'm on mute. I have to find the unmute button. So I put in the chat about, this is really the time in the season, since we're in this political season, of getting out and talking to our representatives in Congress and just flooding their emails with, emails about this, because most of them don't know. Someone else put in the chat about most of them don't know. No, they don't know. And when we're talking about things like the Bill of Rights, even tenant education, which is what we do, no one has a clue because it's not something that we're putting out there all the time. And we just have to flood them with it every day, sending your congressional member an email. And I guarantee you, the more you keep doing it, someone in their office is going to see it and they're going to reach out and they're going to say, well, what is this? Because if we're talking about the housing crisis, yeah, we can talk about it from the money standpoint. We can talk about it from not having enough affordable stock and so forth and so on. But this education piece between the tenant bill of rights and just their rights and responsibilities as tenants, it's the one thing that's not being talked about, but is a key critical piece, because we know once you educate people, they do better. If you don't know better, you can't do better. And so we just have to flood them all. I encourage all of you every day, send them an email about the tenant bill of rights and someone's gonna notice it. Okay, that's my piece.
Thank you so much, Raina. And it's definitely about building like the political will. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was going to go to like Karen's comment next about, reaching out to our members of Congress and them not necessarily like knowing about these kind of things. And it's like it's sad, but sometimes like you're probably the only person reaching out to them about this. So that's kind of, I think, where my organizer brain goes to. I'm like, you have to talk to more people about it and hopefully get them on board too. But thank you for bringing that up.
Can I just say real quick, Sid, to back
that's
up?
Where we
it's
sorry,
funny.
my dog just made an entrance in my room.
Oh,
but yeah, where
it's
we
funny
kind of
because
right?
I'm sorry, it's funny because remember when during the housing bust and people were applying for modifications?
Raina, I think you might be, I don't know if we can hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, so when all the housing modifications came out, right? And my husband, he applied for a housing modification, and you remember, no one really, not even the banks knew what they were doing or any of that. And my husband kept getting denied. And we're like, well, why are we getting denied? We're the perfect candidates for this. So what he did was he sent emails to and certified letters to all of our members of Congress in the state of Oregon, as well as he looked up all the members of Congress who belonged to whatever committee that oversaw that portion. He sent emails to them, and I'm telling you, instantly, we got responses from our senators and our representatives' offices. And the next thing we know, our modification was approved. So it does work.
Thanks for sharing, Raina. And sorry that I interrupted you. And it like showed that you weren't muted on my end. And I was like, I can see her talking, but I can't hear her. And then I realized that I was also muting my computer. But it sounded really passionate. You looked really passionate on my end, and I heard that last bit. So thank you. Kayla, were you gonna add anything else too?
Just props for that. Love that. Thank you, Raina.
Awesome. I think, let me see if there was any other comments, but feel free to continue raising your hand, folks, if there's anything else you'd like to add. I don't know, Kayla, if there was another discussion question you also wanted to go over.
Yeah, I was gonna follow up to a couple things that folks have put in the comments, and I think Mark mentioned too, but you know, in response to having a lot of success through petitioning and organizing, I kind of want to get a little bit more granular about that. So what, and you know, I'm framing this in terms of like, what is it that NLIHC can provide to make the Tenant Bill of Rights, the National Tenants Bill of Rights, a platform for organizers at the community level. And so I'm thinking, you know, what did you use in petitioning? What are some, you know, some pieces that we can turn this into that would be helpful for organizers on the ground?
And while you guys like think about that too, like some of the ideas that we've received already just like internally from staff, but also from like our collective members and alumni have been, you know, some of like the more traditional approaches that we use at the national level, like fact sheets and you know, like toolkits for like media or like organizing and stuff. I can't think of the rest of them off the top of my head, but those are like the very basic ones that kind of come to mind. Yeah. So we have a comment coming in from Karen. Coordinating with like political canvassers. The petition is a nice positive entry. I'd be interested in kind of hearing more about your thoughts on that, Karen. I'm not sure I fully understand the comment, I'm sorry. But like just getting involved with folks who.
Do you want me to talk?
Yeah.
Outreach, door-to-door outreach is, if we're talking about individual signatures on a petition, door-to-door outreach is great because it, you have a mechanism to talk to people that's not too scary. And then I thought maybe to double the effort, to get some help covering doors would be a political candidate, so like the run right now for Congressmember Bush to be canvassing with her people, which would imply that she endorses the petition, which I thought might be nice. Anyway, somehow to leverage the current time where people are outreaching to people. Registering voters is the other, but I imagine that gets trickier these days. To have a petition and a registration alongside probably opens a can of worms. So
Yeah.
does that make any more sense? Is it
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah. The one thing that I will say is that through, because we do a lot of like voter and like election engagement at NLIHC too, but it's like mostly 100% nonpartisan, and we have to stay nonpartisan, so it would be kind of tricky there to do that. So it wouldn't have to be like, it wouldn't be tied to like a specific party or person, but just like trying to like do that outreach, because we know that there are a lot of people doing voter outreach that is nonpartisan too. But I do like that idea, and it definitely makes sense, so thank you for sharing that.
I just wanted to add, I love that idea. And I know that especially as the presidential election year is coming to a peak, of course, it's only August. I hope that all you tenant organizers, that folks are on the ground are also engaging voters. And if people are directly doing some of that work, just to cross other NLIHC work, our Homes, Our Votes campaign is doing a webinar specifically on how to engage candidates, and I'll be talking about engaging candidates about the National Tenants Bill of Rights on August 19th. So I think in our follow-up materials we can reference that. But thanks for that, Karen.
And I just dropped like the link to the campaign in the chat too, so you can sign up for the webinar series there, but we'll also have like other resources there for you. let's see, we have Mark with his hand raised, and then I think there was somebody else who had a recommendation in the chat that we can circle back to afterwards.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify that petitioning certainly is not a strategy for National Tenant Bill of Rights, unfortunately, at this point, unless we're going for a constitutional amendment, which I'm not going to hold my breath on. But it clearly can be a very effective strategy locally, should your city or town have a home rule ability granted by states. But concerning strategy, which is what I think Kayla is looking for here and on the national level, to be honest, I think it's really going to necessitate a really strong tenant movement at the national level, which I don't see happening yet. A lot of people don't know this, but there used to be something called the National Tenants Union 40 years ago, and I was involved with that effort when I was director of my local tenant union here. And there was some hope back then that it could have an impact on the national level, but unfortunately, it really didn't as much as we wanted it to. But still, I see more national organizations popping up around housing issues. And I have some hope that if there could be some kind of coalition of all those tenant organizations, that could at least crack the getting attention to this issue. It really needs, I think, attention. Most Americans, while they are concerned about affordable housing, tenant issues just are not anywhere near the top of their list, unless they're a tenant suffering from problems. And it almost always has to be, there has to be a problem first. People don't just act too altruistically, unfortunately, when it comes to tenant issues. There almost always has to be a problem, and it could be just high rents, and so that's certainly an issue for most tenants. But the larger point, I don't want to belabor this, is creating a national presence and making this an issue, and it's not. And until we make it an issue, I have some doubts about this being able to be passed at the national level. And I don't mean to be pessimistic, because again, there's more national attention to tenant issues than I've seen before in terms of the organizations that have formed and created. We just need to go further with it. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. And that's really, the kind of strategy and movement building we're talking about right now. What does it take to make this a national policy issue, right? That's NLIHC's whole bread and butter, is building the momentum, changing the conversation on how we talk about tenant rights and tenant stability and low-income renters having a safe and decent affordable housing. The issue around making this, make it an issue, make it a problem. I'm thinking about other movements that have had this problem, right? And we don't want another tragedy. We don't want another life lost because of what evictions mean for people. But that reminds me of highlighting what has happened, what evictions have meant for people. Of course, not making it, having it be tenant-led and person-centered. Thanks for that feedback.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And I think there were a few other ideas that were also thrown in the chat that I'll just say verbally for the folks that are watching this afterwards. But there was LTEs, letters to the editors, radio and TV, which is something that our tenant leader fellow D. Ross also brought up that could be really helpful in rural communities. And then something that Raina also brought up in the chat that we've talked about and have dreamed about is doing a rally around this, or some bigger national type of event that could be really helpful. Yeah.
We need celebrity star power, whether it's people wanting to do it locally, whether we can find. So when I'm watching and listening to celebrities and the things that they are championing behind or talking about their lives as they've grown up, I'm always listening for those who lived in public housing, were evicted and homeless for a while. They are supporting housing organizations, and I keep track of who those are. And those are the ones that somehow, some way, if we can reach out to them to say, hey, here's where we need to start. And just like they do the networks do the Red Nose Day and the everything else day, we need a housing national on TV or streaming service campaign. This is the window and the time to do it. And I think we can do it.
Thanks, Raina. And I think I saw somebody with their hand up too. They might have put it down, but in case you want to say what you had to say.
Well, I basically was agreeing with her because getting in touch with someone who has faced that. I have faced that as a senior and as an Aborigine, which is very difficult. They literally forced me into eviction for 4 years. I tried to live in peace. They had tenants to come against me. They literally finally got rid of a tenant because this is the management now that actually had another tenant to come against me. They called the police on me. I didn't even know that until someone confessed it. They called the police on me twice behind my back. There's just so many things they did to me to the point where I was literally said, I quit and I evicted myself. It was just that bad. And that happens to a lot of people based on just how they identify, or it's not just me, but or just because they decide we don't like you anymore. So I think that having bad management who owns a lot of these buildings is a problem. So if you ever want to reach out to me to help with understanding and other people who have lived it, I'm your gal.
Thanks, Chief Mimi. Okay, I'll pass it over to Bill and then to Shayona, unless Kayla, you wanted to. You're good? Okay, cool. I'll pass it over to Bill and then Shayona.
I would be glad to sing Exile with Taylor Swift. It's one of those songs that is in my wheelhouse vocal range. And a lot of others that she does do as duets. It would be great to do a collaboration album or a concert for the basically a collaboration for all the homeless advocacy organizations nationwide. And that would be, I mean, I started singing in 77 when I went to college, but I started karaoke in, I think, 98 timeframe, and it's real fun. I was gonna post that Excel song on the chat.
The intersection of music and advocacy, I feel like we need to explore more, but for people who are watching this after and don't have access to the chat immediately, Bill is referencing a conversation where folks were talking about having like collaborations with celebrities, and somebody mentioned Taylor Swift in the conversation as well. But yeah, I know you're like the karaoke king, Bill, because we keep talking about trying to do it, but we're gonna do it eventually. I promise.
They had live karaoke at the National Anti Homelessness Conference the last 2 years. That was fun too.
Yeah, I'll bring it up to our events committee and see if they like the idea. But yeah, thank you so much, Bill. Shayona? Sorry if I keep mispronouncing that, by the way. let me know if I
It's Cheyenne, and that's
Diana. Thank you
okay.
so much.
It's spelled the way it sounds. It's Cheyenne.
Diana.
But I wanted to mention that my biggest issue, which has been the habitability of my home, my rental home. I'm a Section 8 voucher recipient. I'm a single mom, and I receive TANF, so I am not able to properly manage the property as I have health issues. So this has been a constant back and forth with the property management company regarding servicing the property. So what I ended up doing, and I got together with a couple of other people from the city, I am in the midst of a panel. It's called the Housing and Habitability Advisory Board, and it's hosted by the Chamber of Commerce. So we're trying to get a rule in place for all of Washington that the landlords have to register as businesses. If you have more than 3 properties, you have to register as a business. You have to get a business license. And then there are going to be specific rules regarding maintenance of the property, and they will get fined. These meetings are going to go on into November, I believe. I don't know if there's the opportunity to get on the board still, but this conversation is tremendously important, and it impacts our ability to rent, the rent caps, the extra fees associated with renting, and our habitability and comfortability as renters. So that's just something to keep in mind as well to approach our councilman, or governor, or anyone in power regarding that in different areas, states, and whatnot. Sorry.
No, don't apologize. Thank you, Cheyenne. And I definitely agree with a lot of what you're saying too. I think it's really important. And I also was starting to lose track of the time because I realized we have 4 minutes left. But Kayla, I wanted to make sure that if there was anything else that you wanted to share with the group before we hopped off.
I'll just make it quick. I really appreciate y'all's input. These have been some great suggestions, and I love hearing about your local policy wins always, but making it useful for the National Tenants Bill of Rights and how we build the momentum and build the support nationwide for this is ultra helpful. If there are any additional things you all want to share, you have Sid's email, and I'll put mine in the chat just one more time, but thank you so much, everyone.
So yeah, thank you, Kayla, for being here with us, and thank you for everybody who joined and attended and contributed to the conversation too. Just a few reminders. Don't forget to endorse the National Tenant Bill of Rights. We'll drop that in the chat again, and the link to read the full Tenant Bill of Rights. And because we have Labor Day in September, the next Tenant Talk Live won't be until September 9th. And we're going to be having Courtney Cooperman actually join us from the coalition to talk about the Our Homes, Our Votes campaign. So for folks that kind of brought that up earlier, we can go a little bit further in depth. And we're also going to be releasing a Tenant Talk publication centered around, voting as a collective is the name of it, but it'll be focused on election engagement. So we'll talk about that then too. And Sarah just dropped the link to register for that in the chat. And as always, we're looking for blog post authors for NLHCs on the Homefront blog on an ongoing basis. So if you're interested in having your story highlighted on the blog, or if you just want to talk a little bit about your housing advocacy journey, feel free to reach out to outreach@nlhc.org. And we also have a Facebook page for folks who might be newer to these calls. Feel free to join that if you're on Facebook. And as always, don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions or any feedback about these calls. I know we're in August, but the end of the year will be coming up soon. So in a month or two, just be ready for the end of the year survey where you get to provide me more feedback and stuff on these calls. So yeah.
Sid? Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to remind people to save the chat because there's a lot of links in there.
Yes.
So you'll get a lot if you save the chat.
Yes. And we'll make sure to send the chat out too when we do the connection email at the end of the week. So make sure you're signed up for NLHC emails to get that. And then you can save it by going to the little chat button if you're on your desktop at the bottom of the screen, and that'll open up the chat. There should be 3 little buttons that come up on the top right corner. And if you click that, there should be a button that says Save Chat. And if you're on the phone, I think you can click the little chat feature as well, and hopefully that'll send you to the same button. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in September. Have a good month, and let's get this momentum going. Bye, everybody.